Chapter 13. Since we've just learned about archetypes, let's spend this chapter keeping an eye out for any archetypes we may see. When we arrived at the Tahiri's home the next evening for Lavs, the ceremony of giving word, I had to park the Ford across the street. Their driveway was already jammed with cars. I wore a navy blue suit I had bought the previous day after I had brought Baba home from Kastagari. I checked my tie in the rearview mirror. "You look koshti," Baba said. "Handsome." "Thank you, Baba. Are you all right? Do you feel up to this?" "Up to this? It's the happiest day of my life, Amir," he said, smiling tiredly. I could hear chatter from the other side of the door, laughter and Afghan music playing softly. It sounded like a classical ghazal by Ustad Sarahang. I rang the bell. A face peeked through the curtains of the foyer window and disappeared. "They're here!" I heard a woman's voice say. The chatter stopped. Someone turned off the music. Now, we can take those context clues, and even though I am not Afghani and don't know Afghani customs, I can take the clues, the arriving at the Tahiri's home, the fact that the driveway was already jam-packed with cars, that somebody looks out, that it's Baba's happiest day of his life. All of this leads me to believe that this is some ceremony about the engagement. Khanum Tahiri opened the door. "Salam alaikum," she said, beaming. She'd permed her hair, I saw, and wore an elegant ankle-length black dress. When I stepped into the foyer, her eyes moistened. "You're barely in the house, and I'm crying already, Amirjan," she said. I planted a kiss on her hand, just as Baba had instructed me to do the night before. She led us through a brightly lit hallway to the living room. On the wood-paneled walls, I saw pictures of the people who would become my new family. A young, bouffant-haired Khanum Tahiri and the general, Niagara Falls, in the background. Khanum Tahiri in a seamless dress, the general in a narrow lapelled jacket and thin tie, his hair full and black. Soraya about to board a wooden roller coaster, waving and smiling, the sun glinting off silver wires in her teeth. A photo of the general, dashing in full military outfit, shaking hands with King Hussein of Jordan. A portrait of Zahir Shah. The living room was packed with about 24 guests seated on chairs placed along the walls. When Baba entered, everybody stood up. We went around the room, Baba leading me slowly, me behind him, shaking hands and greeting the guests. The general, still in his gray suit, and Baba embraced, gently tapping each other on the back. They said their salams in respectful, hushed tones. The general held me at arm's length and smiled knowingly, as if saying, "Now, this is the right way, the Afghan way, to do it, Bahim." We kissed 3 times on the cheek. We sat in the crowded room, Baba and I next to each other, across from the general and his wife. Baba's breathing had grown a little ragged, and he kept wiping sweat off his forehead and scalp with his handkerchief. He saw me looking at him and managed a strained grin. "I'm all right," he mouthed. In keeping with tradition, Soraya was not present. A few moments of small talk and idle chatter followed until the general cleared his throat. The room became quiet and everyone looked down at their hands in respect. The general nodded toward Baba. Baba cleared his own throat. When he began, he couldn't speak in complete sentences without stopping to breathe. "General Sahib, Khanum Jamila Jan, it's with great humility that my son and I have come to your home today. You are honorable people from distinguished and reputable families and proud lineage. I come with nothing but the utmost ihtiram and the highest regards for you, your family names, and the memory of your ancestors." He stopped, caught his breath, wiped his brow. "Amirjan is my only son, my only child, and he has been a good son to me. I hope he proves worthy of your kindness. I ask that you honor Amirjan and me, and accept my son into your family." The general nodded politely. "We are honored to welcome the son of a man such as yourself into our family," he said. "Your reputation precedes you. I was your humble admirer in Kabul and remain so today. We are honored that your family and ours will be joined. Amir Jan, as for you, I welcome you to my home as a son, as the husband of my daughter, who is the nur of my eye. Your pain will be our pain, your joy our joy. I hope that you will come to see your Khala Jamila and me as a second set of parents, and I pray for your and our lovely Soraya Jan's happiness. You both have our blessings." Everyone applauded, and with that signal, heads turned toward the hallway. The moment I'd waited for. Soraya appeared at the end, dressed in a stunning wine-colored traditional Afghan dress with long sleeves and gold trimmings. Baba's hand took mine and tightened. Khanum Tahiri burst into fresh tears. Slowly, Soraya came to us, tailed by a procession of young, female relatives. She kissed my father's hands, sat beside me at last, her eyes downcast. The applause swelled. According to tradition, Soraya's family would have thrown the engagement party, the Shrinikori, or eating of the sweets ceremony. Then an engagement period would have followed, which would have lasted a few months, then the wedding, which would be paid for by Baba. We all agreed that Soraya and I would forego the Shrinikori. Everyone knew the reason, so no one had to actually say it, that Baba didn't have months to live. Soraya and I never went out alone together while preparations for the wedding proceeded. Since we weren't married yet, hadn't even had a Shrinikori, it was considered improper. So I had to make do with going over to the Tahiris with Baba for dinner. Sit across from Soraya at the dinner table. Imagine what it would be like to feel her head on my chest, smell her hair, kiss her, make love to her. Baba spent $35,000, nearly the balance of his life savings, on an arasi, the wedding ceremony. He rented a large Afghan banquet hall in Fremont. The man who owned it knew him from Kabul and gave him a substantial discount. Baba paid for the chilas, our matching wedding bands, and for the diamond ring I picked out. He bought my tuxedo and my traditional green suit for the nikah, the swearing ceremony. For all the frenzied preparations that went into the wedding night, most of it, blessedly, by Khanum Tahiri and her friends, I remember only a handful of moments from it. I remember our nikah. We were seated around a table, Soraya and I dressed in green, the color of Islam, but also the color of spring and new beginnings. Ooh, let's pause right there, because lo and behold, it's an archetype. So remember, colors are archetypal, and in this case, green, spring, new beginnings, also the idea of fertility. I wore a suit. Soraya, the only woman at the table, a veiled, long-sleeved dress. Baba, General Tahiri, in a tuxedo this time, and several of Soraya's uncles were also present at the table. Soraya and I looked down, solemnly respectful, casting only sideways glances at each other. The mullah questioned the witnesses and read from the Quran. We said our oaths, signed the certificates. One of Soraya's uncles from Virginia, Sharif Jan, Khanum Tahiri's brother, stood up and cleared his throat. Soraya had told me that he had lived in the U.S. for more than 20 years. He worked for the INS and had an American wife. He was also a poet. A small man with a bird-like face and fluffy hair, he read a lengthy poem dedicated to Soraya, jotted down on hotel stationery paper. "Wah wah, Sharif Jan!" everyone exclaimed when he finished. I remember walking toward the stage, now in my tuxedo, Soraya a veiled pari in white, our hands locked. Baba hobbled next to me, the general and his wife beside their daughter. A procession of uncles, aunts, and cousins followed as we made our way through the hall, parting a sea of applauding guests, blinking at flashing cameras. One of Soraya's cousins, Sharif Jan's son, held a Quran over our heads as we inched along. The wedding song, Ahista Boro, blared from the speakers, the same song the Russian soldier at the Maipar checkpoint had sung the night Baba and I left Kabul. Make morning into a key and throw it into the well. Go slowly, my lovely moon. Go slowly. Let the morning sun forget to rise in the east. Go slowly, my lovely moon. Go slowly. I remember sitting on the sofa, set on the stage like a throne, Soraya's hand in mine, as 300 or so faces looked on. We did Ayena Mahsaf, where they gave us a mirror and threw a veil over our heads, so we'd be alone to gaze at each other's reflection. Looking at Soraya's smiling face in that mirror, in the momentary privacy of the veil, I whispered to her for the first time that I loved her. A blush, red like henna, bloomed on her cheeks. I picture colorful platters of chopin kebab, sola goshti, and wild orange rice. I see Baba between us on the sofa, smiling. I remember sweat-drenched men dancing the traditional atan in a circle, bouncing, spinning faster and faster with the feverish tempo of the tabla, until all but a few dropped out of the ring with exhaustion. I remember wishing Rahim Khan were there. And I remember wondering if Hassan, too, had married, and if so, whose face he had seen in the mirror under the veil, whose henna-painted hands had he held. Around 2 a.m., the party moved from the banquet hall to Baba's apartment. Tea flowed once more, and music played until the neighbors called the cops. Later that night, the sun, less than an hour from rising, and the guests finally gone, Soraya and I laid together for the first time. All my life, I'd been around men. That night, I discovered the tenderness of a woman. It was Soraya who suggested that she move in with Baba and me. I thought you might want us to have our own place, I said. With Kakajan as sick as he is, she replied. Her eyes told me that was no way to start a marriage. I kissed her. Thank you. And I'm taking a moment just to underline eyes and to write down that page number 172 where I'm keeping eyes, because again, that seems to be an important motif. Soraya dedicated herself to taking care of my father. She made his toast and tea in the morning and helped him in and out of bed. She gave him his pain pills, washed his clothes, read him the international section of the newspaper every afternoon. She cooked his favorite dish, potato shorwa, though he could scarcely eat more than a few spoonfuls, and took him out every day for a brief walk around the block. And when he became bedridden, she turned him on his side every hour so he wouldn't get a bedsore. One day, I came home from the pharmacy with Baba's morphine pills. Just as I shut the door, I caught a glimpse of Soraya quickly sliding something under Baba's blanket. Hey, I saw that. What were you two doing? I said. Nothing, Soraya said, smiling. Liar. I lifted Baba's blanket. What's this? I said, though as soon as I picked up the leather-bound book, I knew. I traced my fingers along the gold-stitched borders. I remembered the fireworks the night Rahim Khan had given it to me, the night of my 13th birthday, flares sizzling and exploding into bouquets of red, green, and yellow. I can't believe you can write like this, Soraya said. Baba dragged his head off the pillow. I put her up to it. I hope you don't mind. I gave the notebook back to Soraya and left the room. Baba hated it when I cried. Oh, that's sweet. I like that. A month after the wedding, the Tahiris, Sharif, his wife Susie, and several of Soraya's aunts came over to our apartment for dinner. Soraya made sabzi shallow, white rice with spinach and lamb. After dinner, we all had green tea and played cards in groups of 4. Soraya and I played with Sharif and Susie on the coffee table, next to the couch where Baba lay under a wool blanket. He watched me joking with Sharif, watched Soraya and me lacing our fingers together, watched me push back a loose curl of her hair. I could see his internal smile, as wide as the skies of Kabul on nights when the poplars shivered and the sound of crickets swelled in the gardens. And I'm going to underline poplars there too, because again, trees is yet another motif. But also I want to point out, remember, trees are an archetype. So there's something going on with all the use of trees, and it's archetypal. That is a big universal symbol. Just before midnight, Baba asked us to help him into bed. Soraya and I placed his arms on our shoulders and wrapped ours around his neck. When we lowered him, he had Soraya turn off the bedside lamp. He asked us to lean in, gave us each a kiss. "I'll come back with your morphine and a glass of water, Kakajan," Soraya said. "Not tonight," he said. "There is no pain tonight." "Okay," she said. She pulled up his blanket. We closed the door. Baba never woke up. They filled the parking spots at the mosque in Hayward. On the balding grass field behind the building, cars and SUVs parked in crowded makeshift rows. People had to drive 3 or 4 blocks north of the mosque to find a spot. The men's section of the mosque was a large square room, covered with Afghan rugs and thin mattresses, placed in parallel lines. Men filed into the room, leaving their shoes at the entrance, and sat cross-legged on the mattresses. A mullah chanted surahs from the Quran into a microphone. I sat by the door, the customary position for the family of the deceased. General Tahiri was seated next to me. Through the open door, I could see lines of cars pulling in, sunlight winking in their windshields. They dropped off passengers, men dressed in dark suits, women clad in black dresses, their heads covered with the traditional white hijabs. As words from the Quran reverberated through the room, I thought of the old story of Baba wrestling a black bear in Baluchistan. Baba had wrestled bears his whole life, losing his young wife, raising a son by himself, leaving his beloved homeland, his watan, poverty, indignity. In the end, a bear had come that he couldn't best. But even then, he had lost on his own terms. After each round of prayers, groups of mourners lined up and greeted me on their way out. Dutifully, I shook their hands. Many of them I barely knew. I smiled politely, thanked them for their wishes, listened to whatever they had to say about Baba. Helped me build the house in Tamani. Bless him. No one else to turn to, and he lent me. Found me a job, barely knew me, like a brother to me. Listening to them, I realized how much of who I was, what I was, had been defined by Baba and the marks he had left on people's lives. My whole life I had been Baba's son. Now he was gone. Baba couldn't show me the way any more. I'd have to find it on my own. The thought of it terrified me. I'm going to underline that because I just want to make a note in my own head that he still doesn't feel he can live his life without Baba. Earlier, at the gravesite in the small Muslim section of the cemetery, I had watched them lower Baba into the hole. The mullah and other man got into an argument over which was the correct ayat of the Quran to recite at the gravesite. It might have turned ugly had General Tahiri not intervened. The mullah chose an ayat and recited it, casting the other fellow nasty glances. I watched them toss the first shovelful of dirt into the grave. Then I left, walked to the other side of the cemetery, sat in the shade of a red maple. Now the last of the mourners had paid their respects, and the mosque was empty, save for the mullah unplugging the microphone and wrapping his Quran in green cloth. The general and I stepped out into a late afternoon sun. We walked down the steps, past men smoking in clusters. I heard snippets of their conversations. A soccer game in Union City next weekend, a new Afghan restaurant in Santa Clara. Life moving on already, leaving Baba behind. "How are you, Bahem?" General Tahiri said. I gritted my teeth, bit back the tears that had threatened all day. "I'm going to find Soraya," I said. "Okay." I walked to the women's side of the mosque. Soraya was standing on the steps with her mother and a couple of ladies I recognized vaguely from the wedding. I motioned to Soraya. She said something to her mother and came to me. "Can we walk?" I said. "Sure." She took my hand. We walked in silence down a winding gravel path lined by a row of low hedges. We sat on a bench and watched an elderly couple kneeling beside a grave a few rows away and placing a bouquet of daisies by the headstone. "Soraya?" "Yes." "I'm going to miss him." She put her hand on my lap. Baba's chila glinted on her ring finger. Behind her, I could see Baba's mourners driving away on Mission Boulevard. Soon we'd leave too, and for the first time ever, Baba would be all alone. Soraya pulled me to her, and the tears finally came.